So, I have a new book for the channel, new to me, secondhand, but it's called The Flight of the Romanovs, a family saga by John Curtis Perry and Konstantin Pleshakov. When I was a kid, I saw, what was it, Anastasia. So that's about the Romanov family, or Anastasia from the Romanov family. So I thought it would be a little bit interesting. I've never actually read it, as you can tell, because the pages keep falling. It keeps wanting to open up on me. It's from the year 1999. So, all my books seem to be from 1999. Or not 99, but like the 90s. So the contents: The Death of a Tsar, March 1st, 1881. The Music Tsar, 1881 to 1894. Nicholas II, Family and Nation, 1894 to 1904. A Faltering Monarchy, 1905 to 1914. The Great War, 1914 to 1917. The Crown Falls from the Royal Head, February 22nd through March 3rd, 1917. The First Week of the Republic, March 3rd to March 11th, 1917. The Mood Smells of Blood, March to October 1917. Firestorm, October 1917 to January 1919. Open the Gates, February 1919 to February 1920. Stateless, We Should Act, Always Be Visible, Escape Contact with Allies at Any Cost. The End of the Line and Eternal Memory. So here's a map. It says Russian Empire. Caspian Sea is down here, the Black Sea, Turkey, Persia, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, Germany, the Baltic Sea, Sweden, the White Sea, Finland, some cities. Oh, there's Ukraine. There's another little map. I guess that's specifically St. Petersburg. And then it says Yalta Bay, Black Sea, Crimean Mountains. I think this is a family tree. Yeah. I always like names. I've been collecting names. I started making a thing on Instagram, like just posting lists of names. Just because I think that's how my autism has gone. Because I like making lists of names for some reason. Like, I've always been interested in them since I was a kid. Nicholas I, the Iron Tsar, 1796 to 1855. I guess these are all his children. Alexander II, Maria, Olga, Alexandra, Constantine, Nicholas, and Michael. Alexander II, Marie of Hesse-Darmstadt, Ekaterina Dolgorukaya, Princess Yaryevskaya. I might have trouble with this book. I feel illiterate. George, Olga, and Catherine. Nicholas, Alexander III, Vladimir, Alexis, Maria, Sergei, Paul. Lots of names. I guess to the bottom here it says Maria, 1953, married. Is that M? That means they married. Franz Wilhelm of Hohenzollern. And they had George. And then over here there's Nicholas and Dmitri. A lot of Nicholases. Yeah, every generation looks like has a Nicholas or something with Nick in it. There's Nicholas here and then Nikita. There's another Nicholas there. Nicholas here, Nicholas there. Nicholas. Natalia. Which isn't the same, but it has an N. Yeah. So that's the family tree there. Forward. The Flight of the Romanovs, a family saga. Conspiracy and murder, imprisonment, torture, flight, and abduction punctuate the story of the Romanovs, Russia's last imperial dynasty during their last century. It is a chronicle of glittering sadness, of unfulfilled expectations, and squandered opportunities. As with any family, the Romanovs provide a saga of love and trust, of personal tensions and rivalries, of antagonisms and even hatreds. But because of who these people are, or were, issues of wealth and position permeated and complicated their personal relationships. Before the Great Revolution, the Grand Dukes and Grand Duchesses fled from reality at home, living sumptuous jewel-studded lives in palaces, isolated from the harshness and brutality of Russia. Or they retreated to luxurious vacations abroad. Probably no society has ever experienced a sharper contrast between privilege and poverty, with so few rich and so many poor. This huge disparity fed rage, hatred, and ultimately revolution, forcing the Romanovs and all Russian aristocrats to flee for their lives. Most of the Romanovs, like most royals, were ordinary people thrust by birth into extraordinary circumstances of opulence and power. In a nation of strong women, the Romanov women were characteristically stronger than the men, but when the dynasty faltered, none emerged to seize the throne. The failure of the Romanov will and ability to lead caused many millions to die and shattered a brilliant culture. The misspent lives of the Romanovs brought a tragedy of monumental proportions to the people of Russia. This book is the story of the last century of the Romanovs, from the youth of the future Alexander III in the 1860s to the death of his daughter Olga and the last Grand Duchess in 1960. Ours is the first book to look at the Romanov family at large, when the dynasty was reaching its end. We asked what role the Grand Dukes and Grand Duchesses played in the events in Russia that changed world history, as well as explore what happened to those who fled and survived the Red Terror. Today, in Russia's desperate search for order, questions of leadership assume fresh importance. Many Russians now blame the Romanovs, rulers of Russia for 300 years, for a legacy of material poverty and political repression. Many other Russians now look back on the imperial era as a lost paradise, when a demigod presided over the nation, providing the daily bread and ensuring the physical security of his or her people. How these starkly different interpretations will balance out remains to be seen. Foretelling the future of any nation is impossible. Foretelling Russia's past is impossible. The Russians say. Armed with this caution, we begin our story. Acknowledgements. I might skip this one, this part, only because it just talks about who wrote it, or like the scholars and stuff. Pinnacle. Part 1. A prophecy. A year shall come of Russia's blackest dread. Then will the crown fall from the royal head. The throne of czars will perish in the mud. The food of many will be death and blood. Mikhail Lermontov, 1830. Anatoly Liberman, translator. Chapter 1. Death of a Tsar. March 1st, 1881. At 1:45 on Sunday afternoon, March 1st, 1881, Alexis Volkov, a soldier of the Pavlovsky Regiment who was guarding the squat regimental barracks facing Aptekarsky Lane in St. Petersburg, heard an explosion from the direction of nearby Ekaterinsky Canal. Although not particularly alarmed, he shifted towards the canal as far as his position as a guard permitted. Within several minutes, a second and louder explosion shook the air. Volkov could see the smoke slowly rising over the water, and small knots of people rushing about. In several minutes, 2 sledges, one bearing a mangled, mortally wounded Emperor Alexander II, passed by the way of Aptekarsky and Millionaya Street to the Winter Palace. Grand Duke Michael Nikolaevich, who before the attack had been following his brother, the Tsar, at some distance, was now sitting next to the dying master of the world's largest empire, cradling his inert body against his chest and fulfilling his imperial brother's murdered last command: quickly home to the palace, die there. Just the day before, Alexander, the liberator of the serfs, having recently changed his own life by marrying his longtime mistress, had decided to change Russia's political order. He had signed a manifesto declaring that a number of members of the State Council would hereafter be elected. This would be the first cautious step toward a constitutional monarchy. Emperor Alexander II had decided to yield full autocracy, the legacy of his imperial ancestors. That night, he had played cards with his wife. She asked him not to attend the military parade the next day, March 1st. "Why shouldn't I go?" the emperor said in a merry voice. "I cannot live in the palace like a hermit." Now Cossacks carried the Tsar up to the great palace's white marble staircase, leaving a trail of droplets of blood. Minutes later, the sovereign lay unconscious on a sofa, facing the window of his first floor study in the Winter Palace, heavily hemorrhaging. A grenade had crushed both of his legs below the knees. His right leg was still booted, his left a shapeless, bloody mess. Blood drenched Alexander II's face, and his abdomen was torn open. So forcefully had been the explosion that broken pieces of the Tsar's gold wedding ring, a symbol of his notorious second marriage, had embedded themselves in the flesh of his right hand, although the hand itself had otherwise been unhurt by the grenade. Grand Duke Michael Nikolaevich, in full parade uniform, stood at the head of the deathbed, looking at his brother and weeping. For a while, he was the only Romanov to watch the Tsar's agony. Despite many threats and attempts on his life over the past 15 years, Alexander II had taken on no real cloak of security. He had chosen not to surround himself with bodyguards and detectives. He continued to enjoy his long solitary walks along the Neva embankment, elbowing his way through his subjects when necessary, but always preserving a sense of dignity and calm. 6 past attempts on his life had failed. The sovereign had seemed to enjoy the firm protection of God. Now Alexander's violent death forever shattered the likelihood of any Tsar ever again mingling freely with his people. In chaos and panic, people ran in and out of the emperor's increasingly crowded study, where he lay prostrate, 3 doctors hovering helplessly nearby. Servants carrying basins of reddened water came out of the study, and people in the hallways and on the stairs stopped them in order to dip their fingers or moisten their handkerchiefs in the precious blood. The rigid protocol and organization of court life had momentarily collapsed. Young officers, complete outsiders, having received the news of the attack, rushed to the Winter Palace to peer in at the deathbed. Only their own sense of discretion and decorum prevented them from approaching the dying Tsar. One person stood in the chamber as solemn and solid as a rock, and everyone else there was eager to witness the exact magical moment when all the gigantic authority, both social and sacral, would flow from the agonized Alexander II into his son, who would thus be transfigured from the Grand Duke Alexander Alexandrovich into his Imperial Majesty, the Emperor Alexander III. When he had arrived on the scene, the heir asked the court physician Sergei Botkin how long the sovereign would live. 10 or 15 minutes, Botkin answered. Alexander Alexandrovich, his stoic composure momentarily shattered, exclaimed, "What have we come to?" Then he sobbed and embraced his uncle, Michael Nikolaevich. The heir had arrived at the Winter Palace as the terrible rumor was already spreading over the central blocks of St. Petersburg. Crowds already packed his route. The elegant Nevsky Prospect, the wide passage under the majestic arch of the General Staff Building, and the huge semicircular palace square. Alexander Alexandrovich had heard the two ominous explosions while he and his wife, Maria Fedorovna, were going in to lunch at their Anichkov Palace residence. A Cossack galloping into the courtyard of the Anichkov quickly broke the news. A sledge, the Grand Duke roared, tearing down the stairs. Silence had fallen over the center of the city, interrupted only by occasional outbursts against the students, as terrorists were called. Women spat at the officers. "You, the military, you failed to save our Tsar." Alexander Alexandrovich, slowly driving through the crowds in his sledge, a huge figure next to his tiny wife, could not move any faster. When the officers and the mob solemnly saluted him, he returned the salute and his wife bowed. A rare case of a son's conservatism and a father's liberalism alienated the two Alexanders. The son did not believe that the reign of Alexander II had been a model reign, nor that the life of Alexander II had been the model life of a Christian monarch. Standing by the deathbed of his father and ending the grand ducal stage of his life, Alexander Alexandrovich's grief undoubtedly fought with other equally powerful emotions. Looking at his father's mangled body, Alexander Alexandrovich was sure of one thing: the hydra of the revolution must be crushed if the Romanov dynasty were not to be extinguished. His father might be just the first victim of the fanatics. Alexander Alexandrovich must protect his family. Yet almost everything Alexander II had done angered his son. His sweeping reforms, emancipating the serfs, shaking up the administrative apparatus, creating self-rule for territorial units, all seemed to be misconceived. In Russia, reform was taken by radicals as a sign of weakness, a faltering of the autocracy embodied by the imperial house, and a sign of weakness perhaps it was. Alexander II himself had declared, "Let us liberate the serfs from above, or they will liberate themselves from below." So I think I'll stop there for now. Let me get a little tab. Okay. My bed's here. So I'll just continue reading that in another video. That was a little bit of the flight of the Romanovs. fall asleep a little bit. Yeah. Thank you for liking and subscribing and all that. Hope it helped you fall asleep.